Hello there, my name is Aaron and I like to kitbash things out of old toys and model kits. No toys on this week's build because the other half is getting suspicious of the ever-growing pile of plastic model kits that are appearing on the shelf. I'm going to use a few model kits just to try and reduce the pile slightly, and it's going to be a new world building diorama which I'm calling Monster Hunters, and this build is called Escaped. So let's start scratching that build. I suppose I best read the instructions on this if I want some sort of wagon to be built, and while I build it I'll explain how this idea came about. Now while I build I often either have music playing on my headphones or podcasts, and one podcast that I stumbled across that I started listening to was a guy who also has a YouTube channel called What Lurks Beneath. He was talking about army stories where they had an encounter with a giant snake. Another story was about ghosts in the jungle, but the one that got my X-File heckles up was about a giant that took on some special forces operatives in the caves of the Middle East. The US Army had heard rumours of attacks coming from the caves, so a 4-man special forces team was sent out to investigate, and no sooner had their boots on the ground, one operative had become unalived with a spear to the chest. Bullets began ringing out as the team began shooting into the mouth of the cave. The team dodged rocks the sizes of footballs being thrown at them before they all gasped in shock as a 10-foot red-haired 6-fingered giant appeared in the mouth of the cave, their bullets seemingly bouncing off the giant's thick leathery skin. The giant managed to grab one of the special forces guys and ripped him apart like he was paper. Shocked and enraged, the remaining team gave the giant all they had and somehow managed to fatally wound the giant. As the dust settled, the 2 remaining army men looked around the battlefield and found their friends that were all mangled and torn up, and that of a red-haired giant. They couldn't process what had just happened, but they radioed in and called for backup. 2 Chinook helicopters arrived 30 minutes later. The men were put into one helicopter while the second had a net that the giant was rolled onto, and both helicopters flew off into the morning sun. And that is how the podcast ended. As always, we take the stories with a little pinch of salt, but I always like to believe there's a shred of truth in these tall tales. Did it really happen? Why red hair? Why a giant? Why 6 fingers? But before I continue my story, I'd like to give a few shout outs to subscribers who have left amusing, funny comments on previous videos. Keep them coming. As you know, I always reply to you all. And as always, I appreciate all your support. Keep liking and subscribing to the channel. That story rattled around my bitbox brain for days. I kept wondering what had happened to the giant, and that of the 2 army men. Where were they now? Were they believers or just Justin Biebers? And it was that what happened next question that gave me the idea for this build. So my 3-part story starts in the Arizona desert, a place where it's rumoured to house UAPs and little green men, away from prying eyes with long lens cameras. The 2 men who had encountered the giant were now their own 2-man special forces unit. They were the Monster Hunters, solving cases that were only told around campfires after a few beers. If only the people knew that monsters were real, that legends were true. The folk tales were based on actual events, thought Ace, one of the 2-men team. He had been given that nickname because it had been determined his bullet had been the bullet that had pierced the giant's skin and blown its brains out. His buddy Diamond, the nickname given to him because during that firefight he was the diamond in the rough and the only person Ace trusted. Both men were skeptics before that fateful day. Now they were firm believers in everything that went bump in the night. Both men never spoke about that fateful day in the cave, but they often wondered what had become of that giant. And like all good stories that involve the military, that giant had been tested on, DNA taken, and hybrids made. To try and make the perfect fighting machine, 10-foot tall giants, high on steroids, toting machine guns, the perfect weapon. That was the military's plan, but they just couldn't keep the hybrids alive until they introduced bat DNA. Somehow the bat blood worked, but mutated the giant into a blood-sucking monster. The operation was quickly shut down and buried in the desert. The hybrid giants were thrown into containers and buried deep in the Arizona desert. Everything should have gone to plan, except one giant survived and feasted on the others in the container until the food source dried up. So that giant began hunting for food. And it's code word time. If you got this far without skipping the story and want to leave a comment, put this code word at the start so I know you got here before skipping to the glamour shots. And the code word is Foxy Mulder. And so it was time to send in the monster hunters. During their years in the squad, Ace and Diamond had tackled zombies in Haiti, 100-foot squids in Antarctica. They had seen stuff no one else would believe if ever written about. A giant vampire monster walking the desert was a stroll in the park, or so they thought. For 6 long days and nights, the two-man team baited and waited for the monster's return, which never happened, so they cleared up the site, destroying any trace of giants buried in the desert. And that leads us to why I'm making the diorama. I've often thought what suit would be almost vampire proof, and I thought, why not a bomb disposal suit? Yes, it's heavy and clunky, but with the high protection around the neck, it's almost perfect as a countermeasure against vampire neck bites. The suits have been obviously modified to allow air to be pumped through to keep the men cool while in the desert heat, so that's why they're wearing those suits. And you're welcome for the tip on how not to get bitten by vampires, something that I often worry about. I also know that this video is a departure from my normal videos, but it's fun once in a while to do something different, otherwise it just becomes the same thing week in, week out. I hope you all understand, plus I do like a little story every now and again, and hopefully there'll be enough interest in this sort of video to warrant the second video, which will hopefully come out next month. But for now, I'll leave you with some shots of me getting the diorama together. So the glamour shots are shortly. Thanks for dropping by, I appreciate all your support. I hope you liked the story. Was it true? Was it all made up? Who knows, but it makes you think, what is still out there that we don't know exists? Until next time, keep scratching that build, everybody.